You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV, which is available on Fire Stick, Roku, iOS, and Android. Hello friends, we are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. Here at Forbidden Knowledge News, I've always taken an unbiased, open-minded, and responsible approach to presenting my own theories, and the views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. Conspiracies are definitely fun to discuss in a responsible way. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Phil Warder. First, check out Brainsupreme. If you want to start your microdosing journey with the highest quality ingredients available, visit brainsupreme.co. If you visit brainsupreme.co/discount/FKN15, you'll get 15% off the entire order. Start your microdosing journey right now with Brainsupreme. Watch the Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana. That's available on Tubi, Roku channel, and multiple streaming platforms. Also get a Rokfin premium membership, rokfin.com/FKN+. Be sure to download our podcast episodes through Spreaker, and we're booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Phil Warder. He is host and producer of Unexplained Inc. He discusses topics of the paranormal, metaphysical, unexplained, conspiracy, and spirituality. Phil, welcome back. How you doing?
Chris, I am tremendous. Thank you for having me once again. It's been a minute or two, and since in that period of time, I've been, jumping timelines, eating some shrooms, and integrating my shadow amongst other things. So I'm really excited to catch up with you.
Excellent, man. This is my kind of discussion. It's been a while, and you are back, like you said, to share some of the insights and understandings you've gained from your shamanic path. As I said many times, I owe a great deal of my understandings to consciousness exploration and learning how to integrate the cosmic information into our material realm. I believe as humans we have profound capabilities that are just starting to be rediscovered in some spaces, and there could be no known limit as to what we could achieve just with our consciousness. And this is one of my favorite discussions to get into. Before we get too deep, though, remind the audience a little bit about yourself and your podcast.
Sure thing. My podcast is Unexplained Incorporated, and for those of you on video, the background is my show logo. You can connect with me there on unexplainedinc.com, and it's the podcast where the unknown connects with the empowered. It's a mishmash of paranormal, unexplained, and spirituality. And real quick, I just wanted to mention too, I am also taking clients for distance bookings and healings at lightthewayback.home.com. So those are the two main things I have going on in my never-ending exploration and journey.
Excellent. Well, good introduction. Remind us a little bit about how you got started with the shamanic path.
Sure. we're probably going to get into this later on, but a form of retrocausality, let's say. Um, I first had a Reiki session in September of 2013. I experienced it as a client, and I felt like I was completely reborn. And that was ahead of some major change in my personal life and eventually my professional life. And that just kicked the doors wide open of consciousness, what we were capable of, how we are energetic beings. And over the years, that evolved to me finding a book called The Lost Art of Heart Navigation by Jeffrey D. Nixa. And what this gentleman did, he used to be in the law field and he became a hospice chaplain. And from there, he got a real knack of being of service to people and not just chasing the money and all the material gains. And he went through a series of initiations and trainings to where he became what's known as an urban shaman. Another great example of that is the anthropologist Michael Harner. Him, as well as Sandra Ingerman, are probably the two individuals who are most responsible for shamanic exploration and proliferation in the Western world. And in late 2020, about a year after reading Jeff's book, I found a local shamanic practitioner in my area who has literally been a bit of a lifesaver and a game changer for me. And I decided to get into the trainings myself, and it's just opened up one door after another from there.
Tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that you've been having lately that have led to some new perspectives for you.
Sure, we could do an entire show on this, so I'll try and keep it brief for context. So when we last connected like this, I think over a year ago, we got deep into the psychedelic chat, and we've chatted about this back and forth as to you had your moment on May the 4th, and you've had your own evolution, and I've had my own as well. I've attended two major mushroom ceremonies that changed my life and my perspective. One just after my 40th birthday in August of 2022, and another one this past April, mid-April, where I took a stronger strain at a higher dose, and that one just cracked me open completely. But there's a little bit more to it than that. On top of the psychedelic experimentation, I've been attending sound baths and shamanic breathwork ceremonies. And both of these forms of ceremony have led me into jumping timelines and gaining insight from what I believe are future events for not only myself, but some others around me, and maybe even the collective consciousness. This started in September of 2023. A friend of mine was hosting a guided sound bath at a local yoga studio. And I had been to a couple before, but I said, what would happen if I tapped in and did an upper world shamanic journey? And a review for those who missed my last appearance or two on here. In shamanic journeying, you go into a state of meditation via a sonic driver, being a drum or a rattle, and it takes you into a meditative state. But you can access different realms, and those main realms are the lower world and the upper worlds, and they each represent different stages of consciousness and what you can expect. I decided at the sound bath, what will happen if I set specific intentions and do an upper world journey? Well, it's what I ended up doing, and what I experienced in the non-physical absolutely blew my mind. I received all these missing pieces over visions, premonitions, and what I call spiritual breadcrumbs from over the last several years. They all connected for me in this sound bath, and my friend happened to be holding them on a monthly basis throughout the end of 2023, and I kept going back and I kept journaling new intentions, and lo and behold, I would get shown in this state what I would need to see on these intentions or other messages I would get from spirit. So in a way, I feel like I know things I probably shouldn't know, going forward for my own journey, but I think my soul has reached the point of its evolution as to where I can handle this information and proceed accordingly.
Very interesting. I've had similar experiences, either through meditation or plant medicine, where I felt like I was shown my path, the path that I was on, not exact specific future events, but specific enough to where I felt confidently like I was on the right path and I knew that I was heading to something good. But tell us a little bit more about what you experienced as far as what you were shown.
Sure. Some of it I can't get into because it's pretty
Right on.
personal stuff, but I do have a good example for you right now. December the 29th of last year, it was the last sound bath of the year, obviously, and I was able to make it out. I met one of my spirit guides in the non-physical on this journey, and they looked at me and they literally reached into their pocket and pulled out a mushroom, and it looked like it was something out of like Super Mario Brothers. And then they pointed up towards the stars, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is a specific message. What does it mean? Well, I found out a few weeks later that my shamanic teacher is holding a ceremony, a mushroom ceremony at her place in April. And the strain of the mushroom is called Stargazer. And this one, like I mentioned before, was a game changer in relation to the one I did in 2022. The first half of that ceremony was quite intense and quite painful because I had a lot of my shadow to integrate and to clear, and it was just kind of hanging around, and it came at me full force. However, once I got through it, the second half of that ceremony was glorious. And this one I did in April with the Stargazer and a higher dose. Not very much of it was shadow because I had cleared a lot of it by then, or was just beginning to. So it was a lot more of a pleasant trip. But yeah, there's just so many wild things I've seen about my own journey and the collective. And just to add real quick, we've talked about this before. I've heard you talk about how when you're in these altered states, you need to be careful with what you're interacting with. And there are negative entities, there are tricksters out there. However, thankfully, I have not really run into those. And what I've been shown with my intention has always matched up to my higher good.
You mentioned earlier retrocausality and jumping into different timelines. Let's get into this and how it fits into the human experience and how it can even be possible. Starting with retrocausality, give us your understanding of this and what it means to you. I've spoken with many guests over the years about their own experiences with this. It's kind of difficult to explain if you haven't experienced it yourself, although I understand the basic foundation of it, but tell us about your understanding.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think I've been living and experiencing this before it was ever spelled out to me as to what it actually was. And that moment happened this past summer. And just before I get into that, the further we go along on this journey, you really do start to see that everything is being rolled out in divine order for you if you choose to view things through those lenses and you don't have a victim mentality. You're not negative. You know
Yeah.
what I mean, right? Um, so back in the summer, I had the second appearance on the podcast from Jim Harold, who is known as the Paranormal Podfather. He's been doing a paranormal podcast since the mid 2000s, has become incredibly successful and has many shows on many programs. And we have a pretty decent working relationship together. And before the 4th of July, he released his latest edition of his book, Campfire Tales, which is just a series of spooky stories that listeners and guests have sent into him over the past few months or the past year, and then he releases it as a book. I had an advanced copy of his book, and one of the stories comes across this theme of retrocausality, and I thought, okay, this is something I have to ask Jim about when he comes on. And he gave me a really interesting example. Jim got into podcasting because his background was in radio sales. However, when he worked at the radio station, he wanted to learn every single piece of it inside and out, how it operated, the technical specs, you name it. And he didn't know why he wanted to learn all of this, but it felt really important for him just working as a sales rep. And then he starts his podcast and he says, running a podcast is like running every aspect of a radio station. And he's not wrong about that, obviously. And that was his example of retrocausality. He feels that his future self, whether it be psychically, energetically, interdimensionally, was reaching out to him or pinging thoughts and emotions off of him to say, hey, while you're working at this job, you're going to want to pay attention to everything going on here. And this is why it's going to be important for you to move forward. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to give my own example of retrocausality, and it's very similar to what many would deem to be the butterfly effect. So, aside from the psychedelics and the sound bowls, I got introduced to shamanic breath work, and the host and practitioner who's been running these ceremonies, I had her on the podcast late this past summer, and we've gotten to know each other pretty good. So here's a little bit of synchronicity. I went to my first breathwork event on January 6th of this year. The second one was June the 6th, and the third one, September the 6th. So all with the number 6, 3 months apart. And there's one coming up on December 6th too, but unfortunately I can't make it. But I mean, that just tells you a little something about the divinity right there. So from going to these ceremonies, especially the one this past September, she introduced me to a book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown, because it was in relation to a very specific wound and trauma I was trying to work with and that I was trying to heal. And what's crazy about that is I saw our conversation when I was under the breath work, maybe half an hour before it happened. So I got a signpost for something that close to me in physical time, which was kind of crazy. But I want to take you briefly as to how I ended up at that moment. So I have this book, The Presence Process, which I just finished and has been an absolute game changer in my own healing. I received word on that book because I went to that September workshop and because I had the facilitator on my podcast. I got her on my podcast because I went to her workshop on June the 6th, which is when we got to know each other. And how did I know about that? Well, I went to a workshop January 6th. She was co-facilitating. And that goes back to August 2023. I was at a Reiki share. And I received at my time my level 2 Reiki training in April 2022. And a woman there who I was practicing with told me about this facilitator, Rebecca, and said, if you're into shamanic teachings, you have to go to one of her events. And how did I end up at the Reiki share? Well, the woman hosting it, I met her in December of 2022 at an open house of a spiritual center. And how did I end up there? I met the owner and facilitator of that house at a lake plunge a month prior in November 2022. And what am I doing at a lake plunge? Well, about 3 months prior, I discovered Wim Hof breathing and cold plunges. And why did I get there? Because I got diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea in late 2017 and was looking something to regulate my nervous system and get a healthier sleep. So I can trace back as far back as almost 7 years of events that got me to reading this book, which has changed the trajectory of my healing journey. And that is my example of retrocausality. You just follow your intuition and you follow the breadcrumbs.
It's so interesting because whenever I started my spiritual journey and just started to become spiritually aware in general, that's when the synchronicities started to occur, and I would start to notice them, these little things in my life that would lead me a certain direction, lead me to the next step I was supposed to take. And as I would go deeper into my explorations, the synchronicities would present themselves in stronger ways. Now I can look back at everything, and it seems like a story that's being told that's too perfect to be something that just occurred naturally. And from everyone I speak to that is aware of this, including yourself, you just mentioned this, it seems like for those that have eyes to see and aren't stuck in a dark perspective, that our reality is in a sense for the individual, but it also works together with the collective, because that other person's life is just for them, and it's unfolding in a storybook fashion as well, and everybody's story fits together into this larger picture. Because I can also look back at all the insane events that have unfolded over the past few years and look at where we're at collectively and see the changes in the collective conscious that have occurred, and it seems like people are moving in a different direction, becoming more aware, and it's very interesting to see how everything is unfolding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to mention a quick blurb here from the presence process now that you're on that subject, is that one passage that really hit me hard from the book is, and I'm going to paraphrase it right now, nobody makes peace. We realize it's an internal condition, not an external one. Peace does not need to be manufactured. Wars, mandates, restrictions, other atrocities that are too numerous to name that are labeled throughout history on a quest for peace. I think it's one of the greatest deceptions and illusions we live under, because it is our birthright to be at peace and to live a life as to where we can achieve all that we want to. The true activation of, the term peace on earth really does start from within. It's not from a politician or a newscaster or a soldier or a medical doctor. Like, just off the top of your head, how many messed up things can you think of that have been thrust upon us in the name of peace, but really did a lot of damage to the greater good?
Let's get into the timelines, because I can also look back at my experiences, and I can see, based on the decisions that I make and the perspective that I had, I think that's another very important part of this that dictated where I'm ending up. There have been very profound experiences based on altered states or meditation that when I would come back from that experience, it would seem almost like my reality had shifted so much that things were slightly different in a better way, and I couldn't pinpoint what was different. But there are some that suspect that just by shifting our perspective in certain ways, we can essentially shift to different realities that are simultaneously unfolding, but that just may be based on what we are choosing to do at that moment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think I'm going to share a quick story from my first shamanic breathwork session back in January, because it kind of ties in with what you said there. So when I journey to the lower worlds and the upper worlds, I have my guides, usually the power animals in the lower worlds and some type of ethereal being in the upper world. And the upper world is somewhere you want to journey to for guidance on matters on a bigger picture of collective consciousness or individual consciousness. Like, you'd want to journey to the lower world to find out, oh, should I make a transfer to that new job? Should I buy that car? Like, it's more material, grounded, real world questions as to where, if you journey to the upper world, you may want to say, how can I be more of a service to people? So those are the natures of the two worlds. Well, not too long after this January 6th Breathwork edition, my guides, and in some cases the cosmology of those worlds, changed for me, because that breathwork ceremony ended up being an initiation. Really crazy happening I had was I ended up being guided in the ceremony into like this cave. And of course, there's a major link between the cave and the subconscious, allegorical and all that. And this really ugly, hideous, distorted, almost like a tiger came into the cave. I had seen a beam of white light at the cave, and of course, naturally, I went towards it, and this beast stopped in front of me. Okay, and it like wasn't even walking properly. It just had really negative energy all around, and it would not let me pass into the light. So I was talking to it, and the thing was getting angry with me. It was having an actual dialogue with me, like how you and I are talking right now, and it wanted me to kill it. And I said, no, I can't do that. And it said, why not? And I said, well, because deep down, I really love you. And the beast wasn't having it. So I tried to go around it, and it swiped at my face. And I don't know, I'm in the non-physical, so I did some like martial arts, like roll out of it or something. And I picked up a sword that magically appeared, and I sliced off a corner of its ear, and it went down. And I grabbed it by the neck and I dragged it into the light with me. And it turned into this beautiful snow leopard. And it is now my primary animal in the lower world. And what's really crazy, I also had transformation for my guide in the upper world. I had been journeying and receiving word that this guide I embodied was going to go away soon and maybe pass away. And I said, well, how can you pass away in the non-physical? And it happened. And then I received a new guide in this breathwork journey. And it resembles someone I know here in the physical, which is really interesting and kind of strange. But I equate that whole experience to having an initiation to upgrade my personal consciousness. And with that, my reality has more than shifted, even alongside the psychedelics and the sound baths. And I remember after that ceremony with the shamanic breath work, I felt more grounded than I ever have in my entire life. Because when you go through these things, these ceremonies and these initiations, like you tend to feel lighter, you tend to feel more grounded, and your chakras, especially like the crown with me and your third eye, feel much more open. So to circle back to what you said, I feel the non-physical has a major impact on altering our physical, especially if we go into ceremony and divulge in experiences like these.
Going back to retrocausality just for a minute, I've had several experiences, as have many that I've spoken with, where during the experience I would transport my consciousness back to a childhood traumatic event, shield that child from the event, or somehow alter it in my subconscious to where when I would come back from that event, it would be like it never happened. And it was almost as if I went back in time and shielded my own self from the harm that that event would cause. Would this be considered the same thing as what you understand as retrocausality, or along the same lines?
Yeah, I think that's very similar for sure, because what you're doing is you're traveling from here in the present in the physical, and you're going back to a past timeline to integrate, or shall we say make peace with the trauma. Now I have to ask you, since you went through that, do you feel any connection or any negative emotion associated with that trauma, or are you in a state of acceptance as to what happened and
Oh
have
yeah,
moved
it
on?
definitely moved on. I've never even revisited that experience. I don't have the associated anxiety or anything that came with it, so it was definitely healing.
Good, good. So at this moment, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a moment because I've been talking about this book throughout the interview, The Presence Process, and what it is, how it's helped me, and how it's really a merger of past, present, and future timelines. Um, so I am not getting any kickbacks for talking about this book. I don't know the author. I do not believe that all solutions for our issues exist in one text. However, in this one, there are a lot of solutions, especially if you are trying to work through trauma, your shadows, and what have you. And I'm going to probably be doing a full solo episode of this on my show in January, but I'll just give a little bit of tidbits here right now. So, Chris, I've heard you talk about your childhood traumas here and throughout other episodes. I've lived through my own, as of pretty much everybody on this planet. And we are all, unfortunately, growing into our adult lives and our future selves with energetic imprints. And my understanding of energetic imprints are they are negative experiences and traumas that you likely suffered in your childhood. However, that part of your soul, your emotion, your energy field, it's still stuck in the past frequency of that trauma. And it's leading you to self destructive behavior, whether that be addiction, fearfulness, abuse, whatever it is. These imprints are almost like a stain on your soul, and you have to figure out how to scrub it off and how to get rid of it. And it will happen on a subconscious level. Consciously, you'll be stuck in a behavioral cycle doing things one way, and it'll be normal to you, but then you realize that it actually isn't. And there's a lot of examples that could fall underneath that. And of course, some have way more severe traumas than others. And what you do is instead of healing, because healing, that term can be disempowering and it can imply that you are broken and that you're not whole. And I've come across people who have decided that they're going to be healing the rest of their life and that's their journey and their mission. But are they going to become their best selves in 3D? I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Like they still might be disempowering themselves even with the work they're doing. So for this, in the term used in the book, I will use integration. So you want to integrate those traumas and negative experiences into your adult self so you can make peace with it and move on. And it follows a very similar arc of what you just told me. This book, The Presence Process, it is actually a 10-week breathwork journey. And of course, there's a long intro and there's a long outro, and each chapter is a new week. And literally, all you have to do, and this is actually a little bit more complicated than it sounds in terms of discipline and consistency, you carve two 15-minute sessions out of your day and you just do conscious breathing, either from your nose or your mouth, and you just let things be. It's like a form of breathwork meditation, but the more you stick to it throughout the 10 weeks, and I'm just finishing up this journey now, the integration that's been trapped underneath your modern behaviors will come to the surface, and it will not be pleasant, and it will be difficult to get through. But when you make it out of the other side, it's so worth it. And don't get me wrong, there are many other ways of doing this type of work, but this one I just found extremely effective and extremely simple to do at the end of the day. So to sum it all up, you're shifting to present moment awareness, regardless if you're hurt from the past or afraid of the future. But the fears of the future and the pain of the past are going to come at you, sometimes full force, and it's up to you to integrate them and release them and integrate to carry on with your own life.
Let's go back to what lies beyond our perception, these different layers of reality. I believe that our perception and our imagination is a sort of fuel for our reality. Based on the way we perceive things and our creative abilities, that is what we're going to experience in our lives to a certain degree. I believe that we are creators, and the more that we are aware of how these things work, the stronger those abilities can be. But as you were saying in your experiences about the creatures you would encounter and how they would turn into something beneficial after you'd interact with them in certain ways, and it seems that we're surrounded by all these, call them thought forms, or they may even be something that existed before humans, that always existed in these planes that we're picking up on and interacting with. but it definitely seems like that astral world, this imaginal plane, definitely dictates to a certain degree what we're going to experience in this material realm, and we can tweak and work on this physical realm just by visiting those outside realms, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to break it down very simply, it's all about frequency and energy and where you're at. And you've probably seen the David Hawkins pyramid of consciousness. It's a pretty good model to go by. The base of the pyramid, if I have the shape correct, is shame, and the tip is enlightenment, which almost none of us get to. But it's a good way to measure where you're at. So if you're experiencing shame, fear, anger, grief all throughout your daily life, you're not going to be able to connect to that, I'll say, extrasensory guidance. One other example I have from this, I talked about the creatures I interacted with in the non physical. Well, there's changes to my spirit animal guides here in the physical, which is really odd. And I don't consciously choose them, okay? They just kind of show up when they need to show up. And here's just a couple of examples. And this echoes actually what you were saying earlier about how when you dug deep and you got rid of a lot of the trauma and a lot of the negative stuff, then the synchronicities would start flowing your way and magnetizing. I've been experiencing that over the last month or two. And one of those signs for me has been a red-tailed hawk that I will see on a street light or a lamppost or whatever. Like it'll appear in a really unusual place. And then, not too long after seeing this said animal, a really amazing opportunity would come my way. And very recently, I switched work and I'm working remotely now, which is pretty awesome and is something I'm looking forward to. But before I got the offer for this, I was on a road trip visiting some friends, and I saw within like 90 minutes total of driving 5 different license plates with 777 on it. Like seeing one or two is one thing, but when you see five in an afternoon, like something's trying to get your attention. And a very dear friend of mine as well, this is something that's kind of freaked me out and I'm still trying to unpack. I had a conversation with her, a long one, while I was under the mushroom ceremony in April. And before she appeared in that form, it was either a coin or a medallion appeared with a bumblebee on it, which I did not understand at the time. And the bee has its own lineage of symbolism and all that. Well, I met up with her in person at a social gathering about a month later, and just out of the blue, she goes, "Oh, I've adopted a new animal totem, and it's a bee." And I like almost fell off of like my friend's couch. I was like, I need a moment here. Like, what? Like, come on, like.
Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about more about your understanding of these totem animals, the spirit animals. You mentioned how we can have the physical ones and the ones that appear in our altered states and astral experiences. For me, it's not just necessarily an animal, but it has more to do with the synchronicities or the experience that I'm having at the time, but it can be having something to do with an animal. For me, it can even be my dogs that are acting a certain way. But
Mm.
is this the same thing based on your understanding that it's not necessarily just it's that spirit speaking through something in the material realm?
Yeah, I think it's all the same. Whether you get these signals through animals or through repeat numbers, angel numbers, through songs on the radio, through ads on your algorithm on your social media. I've had a lot of those
Mm.
ones too. But like, we are all on our own journey, going at our own pace, at our own specific frequency. So it's going to be different for everyone. And for whatever reason, with me, it's mostly birds. Birds are such a big one for me. Doves, cardinals, sometimes crows and the hawks, like I told you about. And this goes into some things I talk about on the show, like when I interview paranormal investigators and as to how they're able to get through technology or through a spirit box is that everything at its base is energy. And I strongly believe and concur with the fact that entities or crossed over souls from the non physical can impact energy here in the physical. They found a way to manipulate it. And I think when it comes to things like spirit animals, it's not like some random departed relative trying to reach out to you. I think that's a much higher force at a much higher frequency. And I've had this discussion on my show a couple of times too, and I think it's been on here as well, as to how many are beginning to believe that extraterrestrials and UFO sightings are so fleeting because here on Earth, the density is so thick that the frequency they survive and vibrate at, that they can't handle this density. And that's why those sightings are so quick and they're so fleeting. And
Hmm.
I just overall believe that the non-physical is manipulating the physical all the time, but it's up to us as our antennas to tune into it and notice it.
Well, let's take a look at the possibility of that being flipped. I do a conspiracy show, so I obviously cover some very dark topics, especially as it pertains to the technology. Since you just mentioned technology, I'd like to throw some possibilities that I've heard out there and get your insights into it. There are many believe that because of the level we're at with our technology and the different nefarious interests that are in control of it, that there may be more things than we had ever realized going on just beyond our perspective, but it could be based on weaponized technology, and it could have effects on our consciousness that we're not even aware of, things that could be very detrimental. I've spoken with people lately that believe that because of the level of technology that we're at and what we have access to as far as pharmaceuticals, the level of programming we've been subjected to for decades, that there is a layer of reality beyond our perception that is technological, that even the astral realms may have this technological overlay that's a false reality on top of these other realms that are natural. There's concern that this is going to continue and it could have detrimental effects on the collective consciousness, on our own consciousness, and force our perceptions to believe that some of these things that are technologically based and basically an infiltration on our reality are real. And it could even go as far as trapping elements of our consciousness in this matrix within a matrix, which goes deep. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like, I don't think we're ever going to reach a point, at least in our lifetimes, where we fully have this figured out. So at best, all we can do is
Mm,
spitball and speculate, which I'm totally cool with. And when you were saying all that right away, because it's been another hot topic on my show lately and will continue to be, is the potential of this Project Bluebeam
right.
false alien attack or invasion. To me, that would be the ultimate technological deception and would really throw our current reality out of balance. It's a tough one to get into because, to me, in the research I've done and my whole perception is that this world obviously has been hijacked by some kind of forces, and those forces run government, politics, media, the military industrial complex, big pharma, and all that. And those who are in the know and that are in the inner circle, they have access to technologies or old rituals or whatever you will, old spells that are probably so far beyond our comprehension that there's probably so much being used on us that we don't even realize it. However, I think the good news is that more and more people are opting out of things like big pharma, big media, big tech and all that, and they're getting back in touch with our natural selves, with our soul, and with our nature. And from what I've been shown on my own journeys is that this kind of, dark cabal, whatever you want to call them, operate at a very lower dense frequency, and they're going to push harder and harder. But I think the harder they push, the more people are going to go to the lighter frequency and to the other side and kind of see through the veil. So I hope that answers your question enough, because I know that's a bit of a loaded
Well,
one.
it does seem like in the past few years, we've been presented these situations and circumstances that are forcing people to choose from basically good or evil right now. And the bad situations are getting so bad and getting worse that more people that are in the middle will be inherently forced to choose something good unless that's what they are at the core. Then they will go to the dark side. And I think this will continue until we have these complete separated groups of people who align with the dark and people who want to be part of the matrix system living in enslaved in smart cities. So it's a very interesting time, but I do see that looking back, I think that overall we are moving in a more positive direction. I am concerned that there are people falling into traps with politics and a lot of the promises that are being made through politics right now. I completely believe that's a psychological operation. I never get into politics, but I can step back and look at how everything unfolded, and my gut and past circumstances and the way things have always unfolded tells me that people are falling into a massive trap right now, and it's just going to lead to more surveillance, more big tech oversight, and more of a technocratic slave state than we've even had before. But it's all going to slip it under there, under the guise of something that's beneficial for us because they're quote unquote getting rid of all the cabal or draining the swamp, which in reality, they're just adding more swamp creatures while we're looking in the other direction. So it's a very interesting time we're in.
It is. And just to add to that, and it kind of ties into what we've been talking about here, is that a couple of weeks ago, I released a solo episode on the hypercharged energy surrounding American politics. That was part of the episode anyway. And I don't get into the geopolitical thing very often, but I felt like it needed to be addressed due to various reactions I saw in my personal life and across my social platforms. And remember, I'm Canadian. Like, I'm not even directly involved in this, but like, I can't hide from it, So to go back a quick second to the presence process, there's a couple of tremendous quotes I just want to share with you that I feel tie into what you just said. And one of the main mantras of the book is, I am responsible for the quality of my experience. And that goes into choosing responsiveness over reactivity. And like I said, I'm doing a show on this in the new year. I'll get more in depth on that at that point in time. But one other thing I shared on this solo episode was that all triggers are just forms of unhealed childhood trauma and childhood programming. And when that comes to the schism and the great divide that you mentioned, some will call it New Earth, the Golden Age, the Age of Aquarius, whatever you will. But I heavily lean towards the fact that will unfortunately happen. Because like I said, and what I've been shown under the plant medicines, we are all on our own journey at our own speed and our own frequency. And I'm responsible for mine and not anybody else's. Everybody has to take some personal responsibility and accountability. And I feel for the ones who will get trapped in that dystopian type of scenario that you laid out. Those are the people, in my humble estimation, that are anchored by fear, grief, and anger and shame, and they are not in touch with their personal power, and they have not healed any pains and traumas from their past. Because now, I talked about this on an episode probably a couple of years ago in the movie The Never-Ending Story. And watching that movie with this new set of lenses after the journeys we've gone down, it's really interesting. There's a very chilling scene where Atreyu confronts the wolf. I don't remember the wolf's name in the cage, in the cave, I should say. And he's explaining why the kingdom should basically surrender and give up to the void known as the nothing, which is just swallowing planets and galaxies whole. And the wolf ends up making a point saying, when people are afraid, they are easier to control. And I recommend looking that up on YouTube if you haven't seen it in a while, because it's absolutely chilling. And it's spot on, I think, with how the dark controllers think. And I think those who are afraid and are stuck in the low level emotions, they're unfortunately going to wind up in the other side, the dystopian side, and that's going to be their lesson to learn. And people like us and who are listening, we do the best we can to guide them along, but they have to take their own personal responsibility when that schism does happen. And I think it is only a matter of when instead of if.
Right on. Let's talk a little bit about visualization. And I think once someone has a better grasp and understanding of the powers of visualization, what can be achieved by our own imagination, they can better understand some of the concepts that we're about to get into. Based on my experiences, I've always been creative. I've always done art. I've always made music. I'm making movies now. But whenever I was in a dark period in my life and I put all that to the side and I wasn't doing anything, that was the worst period of my life. And not only was I not expressing my creativity, it caused blocks in almost every aspect of my life. It caused depression. So first of all, I believe that our creativity is also a fuel for our happiness. I think that as long as we're embracing some creative aspect of our consciousness and our capabilities, that will propel us to be in a better state of mind overall. But not only that, if I am doing what I love in my life, and I just am sitting there having a daydream about things that could possibly happen in the future, things I want to achieve, there's so many instances where I'll look back and I'll be like, wow, I remember just sitting daydreaming about this very moment unfolding, and it will seem so surreal as it occurs. Somehow those moments, they've either already unfolded and we're somehow connecting to that, or we're creating it, or maybe we're doing both somehow. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, in relation to the timeline stuff I was able to describe with you earlier, I'm starting to lean towards like everything happening all at once, and our bodies, our minds, and our souls can only comprehend like one dimension at a time. And it's like we take this out of ourselves when we go to the past or the future timelines. And creativity is so interesting because, as we all know, like we hear it over and over again, the dark controllers have no creativity. Like they just repeat, rinse, cycle, repeat over and over again. And those of us who are seeing past the veil, we're like, oh, come on, like, is this the best you got? Like, creativity also, I strongly believe, contributes to living with an open heart. And when you live with an open heart, that's when things can flow through you. But you also live with an open heart with a spirit of giving without expecting anything in return. We both do podcasts and we love doing them. You do yours for a living, mine's more of a side gig, but I think I can find common ground with us where we love sharing this information and we love having these chats with like-minded people. And it's nice when we get stuff in return, but we're doing it out of the love of service and the love of ourselves. And I think, once again, that is just a higher frequency to live at. And once again, you touched upon retrocausality. Is it all coming from the future to make a better present for us? Is it from an entirely different timeline? running parallel to this one. It very well could be. It's just one thing I've learned on this journey is like time is not a straight line as we perceive it. Like that is all an illusion in and of itself. And yeah, it's just you could go on hours and days thinking about it. It's also interesting if you're willing to tune
Yeah,
in.
speaking of interesting, we are in high strange times once again when it comes to UFOs and UAPs. All on the news, you hear about sightings, the congressional hearings. More and more people are now believing in UFOs and getting into this. And ever since our government and media started talking about UFOs, that's when my spidey senses started tingling. And being in this space for as long as we have, there are obviously deceptions. There's obviously misinformation and infiltration by entities that want to muddy the waters. And this is one of the biggest topics that has ever come out of our human history. And there's some interesting things happening with this. I have different considerations. There's so many different theories that I've heard, but I think there is a heavy hand of our military industrial complex and government as it relates to what we're experiencing right now, what we're seeing in the media, what's permeating through the collective consciousness. I think it's all been programming, probably so that the military can develop new weapons and they can have more technical control over the masses, but there's probably also multiple layers to this. And I'm not saying that UFOs and aliens don't exist, but I think right now what we are being presented is based on a narrative of something that they don't really want us to know what's really happening.
Well, I have two schools of thought on this. First off, being there are more and more people reporting and initiating their own contact experiences. And I've had some in the non physical. And this past summer, for the first time ever, I had my own set of orb sightings in the sky. I had a couple I was able to get on film, and they're on my social media. So that made me just stop and think, maybe if we're vibrating at a certain level, we can make contact to these interdimensional beings, ETs, whatever you want to call them, on our own. And we're just starting to spread and get out. And the powers that be don't like it. And number two, I am also more fully into agreement with the fact that this public discourse within the last year or so is all some guise or some cover for a darker agenda. And whether that's the fake UFO invasion or whether that's to enforce a type of law, dare I say martial law, I don't even want to think it, or does the military industrial complex want to test out new weapons that are going to have a massive negative impact on the planet, and this is the only way they could get public support? Or do you sit on the theory that there are benevolent ETs and malevolent ETs, and that the malevolent ETs have been having secret dealings with the military industrial complex and the government for hundreds of years? Like, I really think it could be all of the above. And I want to point something out before I finish here. This made me think of back in the day when I would watch Robert Stack and Unsolved Mysteries. And back then, the late 80s, early 90s, talking about mere UFO reports on television was still highly taboo. Like, that stuff was saved for the grocery store tabloids. And if you looked into it, well, you were off your rocker. You were totally nuts. And some of these cases that would get explained and reported on that show, one of the skeptical ways they would try and pawn it off was to say, well, it possibly could have been a mass hallucination.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wait a second. If we're all sovereign light beings on our own journey, on our own frequency, at our own pace, how can an X amount of people, let's say like 50 people, all share the same hallucination and report about it on the same way? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's just so interesting in the last 35 years, we've gone from that to, Oh, by the way, aliens live in the ocean. How did you not know? Like, it's a very strange U-turn of events, to say the least.
I'm going to keep paying attention, but the emotional attachment to any of this, to anything we see on TV, anything we hear on social media, it shouldn't exist. The only thing we should be emotionally attached to is our friends and family and loved ones. And everything else should be at the most entertainment for us. But we're definitely in interesting times, and I am fascinated as to how everything is rolling out. Before we close out today, Phil, tell us more about what's coming up with Unexplained Inc.
Oh, a lot of exciting stuff. So I'm going to take a quick second and talk about some changes I've made in the past year. I've made the decision to record some solo episodes to help with the workflow, and they've been going down really well. I'm just going to run those down super quick. I have the Consciousness Cafe, which is an hour-long informal chat that has on certain practitioners, healers, who maybe don't always follow under the unexplained paradigm, and it gives me a little more to talk about. I have The Great Escape, which has unexpectedly turned into like a self-help novel with chapters. I did not intend for that to happen, but it's happening. Chapter 5 dropped at the end of November there. And there's the Astral Report, which, Chris, was actually inspired by you back when you used to do the trip reports. And this Astral Report, I took a little crash course on astral projection late in 2023. And I've been taking these segments to do astral journeys into past unexplained events like UFO crashes and such. And I say it is for entertainment purposes only because it's just my perception, but some interesting findings happen from there. 2025, going to be a big year for the show. I will be having my 5-year anniversary at the end of March, and April 11th will be the 200th episode of the show, and I have a guest booked for that already, plus an accompanying live stream. And very recently, as of Halloween, Unexplained Incorporated is on all the usual audio channels, but we are now doing video episodes on Rumble as well. I'm starting there, and I'm going to expand. Past episodes will be going up there starting early next year. So lots going on, and you can connect to all of it at unexplainedinc.com.
Awesome. Phil, thank you so much. We'll definitely be doing this again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We will talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.